Hello, in a few minutes' time, I'm going to go to the local bookstore and do something naughty, very naughty. Why? Because the Booker Prize Longlist has just been announced and I feel as though I want to do something that I don't normally do. So while I do that, what I want you to do is one thing. When it comes to writing and video making, I think big, I think epic. So this is going to be a long and detailed video. So what I suggest you do is go and make a cup of tea, have a few cookies ready, have a chocolate cake, and most importantly, sit back, relax, because this is going to be big, deep, and long. That's what she said. Hello, I'm Samuel Durham. If this is your first time watching my video, I'm a playwright. My last play, Taylor Swift's Dog, won a major competition in England and he went on a tour with performances in London, Cheltenham and Bucks. And Taylor Swift's Dog is about the publishing industry. I also won few prizes for screenwriting and novel writing. I'm working on a novel right now called Teardrop Island, which is about a real-world dystopia in northern Sri Lanka during the Sri Lankan Civil War. And even though that project is not finished, it has already won 2 important prizes in Europe. So why am I telling you all this? Well, my goal as a video maker on YouTube is to give you value. If you're watching this, you are my ideal viewer. So everything that I do, I want to do it for you so that I can give you value in terms of education, information, motivation, or inspiration. So throughout the next few minutes, if you feel that I'm providing you with those values, do please consider subscribing to the channel. My videos are for 3 types of people, 3 types of viewers. Firstly, those of you who are apprentice playwrights, novelists, or screenwriters. Secondly, those of us who love reading books. And thirdly, people who are really passionate about self-improvement. In the last 5 years, people like Tony Robbins and Tim Ferriss have been enormously helpful in me to get to the places where I want to go in life and in my art. So I want to pass my messages to you. As I'm making my way through this journey as a storyteller, I want to share those lessons with you. The Booker Prize is really important for me because when I came to England as a refugee child, age 13, I was at an English school when English literature mattered a big deal. And I fell in love with the English language. I love the sound of it. I wanted to learn it. I knew about 20 words in the English language. Things like, my name is Samuel, I'm from Sri Lanka, things like that. But I was determined to learn the English language. If you want to know more about me, I've already done 2 other videos on this subject. So when I was growing up, I was at a school where people talked about Julian Barnes, Kazuo Ishiguro, Pat Barker, Jeanette Winterson, Martin Amis, Ian McEwan, Salman Rushdie. These were like the older generation. So as I grew up and wanted to be a novelist, I carried on learning from these masters. Interestingly enough, some of these names have already won the Booker Prize. Jeanette Winterson and Martin Amis are the ones who still haven't won it yet, but more about that later. But the Booker Prize means a lot to me because I learned the English language quickly and fast because I fell in love with books, especially books by great English novelists. And from the age of about 14, I followed the Booker Prize because most of the boys and girls in my year were following it. And then even at home, my sister and I would always talk about it. So even now as adults, even though my sister lives in a different part of England, we would text and email and phone each other to talk about the Booker Prize. It matters a lot for another reason in that it allows me to discover novelists that I wouldn't have heard before. Last year, I hadn't heard of Anna Burns. Then I went on to read Milkman. It's a good novel. But the Booker Prize, despite its many faults, is still the best in the world. And I think we need to discuss this prize because between July and October is the time when people like me read a lot of literary fiction. In 2017, I read a really important report by Arts Council England called Literature in the 21st Century. And that made me want to write not one but two plays. That report was about the state of literary fiction in Britain. And there were three things that really concerned me. Now, these were things I already knew, but it was good to have that in a report. Firstly, the sales of literary fiction were falling, and they were really disturbing. The second thing was the top 1,000 authors in Britain. They were the ones who were making a full-time living by book sales alone. And the other authors who were outside the top 1,000 have to struggle. And the third thing is that too many people who are succeeding, especially those in the top 1,000, are part of networks, especially closed networks. So it was difficult for, obviously, for outsiders to get in, to make a difference in the world of literary fiction. So when I read that, it really disturbed me because I already had observed some of these things before in publishing. So instead of ranting about it, I thought I went to work. I'm a playwright, so I came up with an outline for a play called Chicken Curry for J.K. Rowling. This story was about three 18-year-old girls and one 18-year-old boy. They're in the first year at university in London. And the whole play is what's called a contained drama. It takes place in just one lunchtime in a room, and they fight over J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter. But the subtext is that they're fighting over something bigger about their lives and the state of publishing. This play ended up as a finalist in a major playwriting competition. Then I wrote a play called Taylor Swift's Dog. Again, this was about publishing, except this time it's about three different girls from three different demographic groups who were all influenced by one woman, J.K. Rowling. The protagonist is Yasmina. She's an 18-year-old girl who's obsessed with the idea of becoming the next J.K. Rowling. So it's about her journey, and the two other girls are literary agents who from two different demographic groups, and both of them in different ways want to find the next J.K. Rowling. So the whole the play is about Yasmina's journey to become the next J.K. Rowling and the obstacles that she faces. So my heart and mind are really obsessed with publishing, theatre, film and TV. And this is the other reason why the Booker Prize matters a lot to me. I watch it regularly. It has many faults, but I think Britain is still great because we have the Booker Prize. Gabby Wood has mentioned something important in The Guardian in June this year. Gabby Wood is the director of the Booker Prize. She said that thing about the American prizes is that most of them don't allow British authors to enter and compete there. For example, the Pulitzer Prize, to win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, you need to be a US citizen. Whereas since 2014, you can win the Man Booker Prize as long as it's published in English in the last 12 months, you are eligible. And as long as your publisher submits that novel, you can win. So Americans are eligible to win. And I think this is, with all the faults, Booker Prize is still the best literary prize in the world. And I'm proud to live in a country that gave the world Jane Austen, Dickens, Agatha Christie, and J.K. Rowling. It has also given us E.L. James, but more about that later. It's authors like E.L. James who keep the publishing world alive. So literary fiction can survive and prosper in a small way. But I'm going to talk more about that later. So this is why I'm really passionate about the Booker Prize, and I am genuinely excited about this year's Longlist. So the first on the long list is Margaret Atwood's The Testaments. Now, Margaret Atwood gave one of the most inspiring Booker Prize acceptance speeches of all time back in 2000 when she won it for The Blind Assassin. I still remember that speech, watching it with my sister, and she said something. She said that even as I'm speaking to you right now, somebody out there could be dreaming of being here. And I even though at that time I hadn't written a single thing, it meant something to me. It meant something. It inspired me. And Margaret Atwood, now this novel, The Testaments, is set 15 years after Offred's last scene in The Handmaid's Tale. Offred is the protagonist of The Handmaid's Tale. And the story is narrated by three different characters. That's all we know, because there's a huge problem here. This novel won't be published until the 10th of September. The shortlist for the Booker Prize will be announced on the 3rd of September. So we have to wait 7 more days after the shortlist to even read this novel. And maybe it's just a marketing strategy. I feel as though they should bring the publication date forward. because what is the point? Chatto and Windus is the UK publisher of the Testaments. I mean, what is the point? I mean, is the reason to publish it in September is to build up a big hype. So when it comes out in September, it becomes a huge worldwide #1 novel. I think that the Handmaid's Tale, and more importantly, Margaret Atwood, has a huge fan base. Even before the recent Hulu TV adaptation of that novel, she had so many millions of fans all across the world. Even when I was at school, there were many people reading it. When I went to university, so many people, especially girls, worshipped Margaret Atwood. And I've been reading her essays and poems and, more importantly, novels for a long time. So it doesn't matter. So the hype is not necessary. The book is going to sell well. So, I mean, what is their plan? In September, what's going to happen? Now, the publishers might be so certain that it can be #1, a huge bestseller. So they're probably holding on that. But what if in that week, someone like E.L. James brings out a new 50 Shades novel? If that happens, E.L. James will get to #1 all across the world. We know that. Because E.L. James has a much bigger fan base, right? Because it could happen, because my neighbor Audrey is a huge fan of 50 Shades. I haven't read it, honestly. So anyway, the first 3 novels are told from the point of view of Anna. The spin-off is told from the point of view of Christian Grey. Now, what if in September E.L. James decided to bring a novel that's told from the point of view of Christian Grey's cat? Yeah, Christian Grey's cat, narrating the life story of Christian Grey. And let's call it Christian Grey's Pussy. Great title, right? That would go straight to #1. Even I would buy it. Now, if E.L. James publishes that novel in the first week of September, that's going to beat Margaret Atwood. So what is the point, right? And E.L. James, if you're watching this, you can have that idea. If you don't use it, I might write it and call it fan fiction. Getting back to Margaret Atwood, I think this seems like a marketing strategy by her publishers or marketing team. I just hope they bring the publication date forward so we can all read it. Even now, the reviewers and literary critics who can read, they've been given this really ferocious non-disclosure agreement whereby they can read it, but they can't talk about it. They can't make videos like this about it. So even if I might be able to get somebody at Chatto and Windus to send me a copy, yes, I would like one of those. I won't be able to make a video, but what I can do is make a video and then release it after September the 10th. That's an idea. So that's the annoying thing about it. And I think maybe one of the goals of Margaret Atwood's team is to get this kind of talk going. But I don't think it's necessary. She's an icon. The Handmaid's Tale is one of the great classics of the last 50 years. So I don't see the point of it. I also think this, even though we don't know the whole story, it is a strong contender to win the Booker Prize. John Updike, when he first reviewed The Handmaid's Tale back in the 80s for the New Yorker, he said that this is a poem for the female condition. More importantly, this is a novel that reflects our time, as in the mid 1980s. What Updike didn't live to see is that we are living in an age that Margaret Atwood foresaw 30 years ago. So this is why, and I think when we come to October for the Booker Prize announcement, we'll be about 9 months away from the US presidential election. So I think a lot of judges will be thinking about that. I think there's a good chance that a lot of other factors could play, and the Testaments could win the Booker Prize. I haven't even discussed the other 12 novels yet, but I think this is the favorite because of lots of reasons. So we all need to do. I can't wait to read this novel. She's an important novelist for me and so many people of my generation. So Chatto and Windus, let's have that novel. Bring the date forward because this is really important. I want to talk to you a little bit about astrology and horoscopes. I have a literary crush on Eleanor Catton, who won the Booker Prize for the Luminaries a few years ago. And the thing I like about her is that she loves astrology, horoscopes. I also like to look at the lives of novelists, screenwriters and playwrights through horoscopes and astrology. It's fun. And as everybody knows, astrology is 100% accurate, right? Margaret Atwood was born under the sign of Scorpio. Scorpios are really intense, determined people. This year's list is dominated by Scorpios. There are 3 Scorpios. Usually Scorpios don't do well. In the top 12 list in the star signs, right? When it comes to storytellers, the ones who do really well are Librans and Cancerians. So when you look at Cancer, you've got people like Ian McEwan, Hilary Mantel, Cormac McCarthy, and then going back to Kafka, Proust, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and then Muriel Spark, Tom Stoppard. And with screenwriters, we got Joss Whedon, J.J. Abrams, Paul Thomas Anderson, Robert Rodriguez, Cameron Crowe. And then in England right now, we got the most exciting screenwriter, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who wrote Fleabag and the season 1 of Killing Eve and the next James Bond movie. So lots of exciting, great storytellers are Cancerians, right? Usually we don't get many Scorpios, but in this year's long list, we got 3. And how many Cancerians have we got here? Just one. Kevin Barry, who wrote A Night Boat to Tangier. So well done, Kevin, for flying the flag for us, Cancerians. So what are the literary turn-ons for this novel? The first one is the premise. When I first looked at it, I thought this reminds me a little bit of Graham Greene's The Heart of the Matter and a little bit of John le Carré's A Tailor of Panama. But then when I look more into it, it's nothing like that. But that's the second turn on, because Barry is trying to do something different with a conventional story. So I admire that. The literary turn-off here is that what if he's trying to do too much? What if I don't get the story? To me, everything has to come down to the story. Literary fiction doesn't have to tell a story, but I read things for the stories, right? It may seem so obvious. You'll be amazed by the number of literary novels that don't really care about story or storytelling. So that's the turn-off, because I have a fear that it might not be a great story. It's supposed to be lyrical and beautiful and all that. I haven't read it. I am going to read it. So it's good that he's on the list. And next on the list is Oyinkan Braithwaite with My Sister, the Serial Killer. Oyinkan Braithwaite is Aries. She was born in Nigeria, but she got her degree in creative writing and law from Kingston University, London. This is her debut novel. But here's the thing. A lot of people who work in publishing, literary editors, agents, they get a big turn on for debut novels and debut novelists. They get so excited about it. Here's the thing. On this year's long list, this is the only debut novel. And this has already been shortlisted for Women's Prize for Fiction earlier in the year. And I think this has a good chance. I love the premise. Nigeria has already produced many good novelists in the last 20 years. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, for example. And then we got one other important novelist coming up later on the long list. But now we got Oyinkan Braithwaite. I think she has got what it takes to get on the shortlist. I will be doing a separate video about this particular novel. So until then, let's move on to the next one. Lucy Ellmann's Ducks Newburyport is the next on the shortlist. Lucy Ellmann is a Libran. She was born in the United States, but she moved to UK when she was a teenager. This novel is the longest that I come across so far. The longest to win is Eleanor Catton with The Luminaries, but this one is over 1,000 pages long, and it's mostly a monologue of a housewife in Ohio. The premise reminds me a lot about that great short story by Charlotte Perkins Gilman called The Yellow Wallpaper. If you haven't read it, you must read it. When I first read it, it made me go crazy a little bit. But that's just a short story. But this seems like a really epic, bonkers, modern-day version of that short story. And that's one of the literary turn-ons. The other literary turn-on about this is that she has taken a really crazy idea and she's trying to tell a story over 1,000 words, 1,000 pages. If it's 1,000 words, that would be really something, a real work of genius. Over 1,000 words. The problem, the literary turn-off here is that when Dr. Samuel Johnson was writing a review of Tristram Shandy, another experimental novel, he said nothing odd works long. And I think when I looked at the premise, it is interesting. But the question is, can it work over that length of time? And she's also using lots of other experimental devices. And I will be discussing all that in detail when I do a whole video just about this novel. I am excited, right? But excited that people are still trying to do something crazy, truly bonkers like this one. Last year we had Richard Powers doing his thing with the trees. Now we got Lucy Ellmann. I will definitely read it. But I'm not sure whether she can pull it off. The fact is, this is a novel that was one of 150 novels that were submitted to the Booker judges. This made it. This is the last 13. So if it got this far, she must be doing something amazing. So this is why I can't wait to read it. At the same time, my hopes are low. I hope I enjoy it. The extract I read so far is good. But once again, I keep thinking about Dr. Johnson. Nothing odd works long. Lucy Ellmann, I wonder if she can prove me wrong. Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo is an experimental novel. It's a verse novel. It tells the story of 12 different characters. Most of those characters are Black British women. I'm really passionate about this particular novel because I know a lot of many interesting and inspiring Black British women, but their lives are not fairly or satisfactorily represented in British literature. And here comes a novel which is a really story of our times. And Bernardine Evaristo is a professor of creative writing at Brunel University in London. She has already written on subjects like the African diaspora. She's a British Nigerian author. I'm really excited to see her on the long list. I think this is another one of those novels that could get to the long list and might even win it. And it's also important is that this is a novel that will get a lot of people, especially in Britain, talking about Black British women, a very neglected demographic group when it comes to literary fiction. So I'm really excited by that. I will be making a separate video where I will go into detail about the issues raised by the novel and more importantly the techniques. Bernardine Evaristo, like a lot of novelists on this year's long list, are experimenting with the form, and that's one of the literary turn-ons. A literary turn-off could be, once again, that when you experiment, sometimes the story might not be coherent. So I haven't read it yet, so when I do, I will make a whole video. John Lanchester's The Wall is partly a dystopian story. It deals with issues like immigration, populism and climate change. It is another experimental novel. John Lanchester is a Piscean, a bit like some of my favourite novelists, Philip Roth, Tom Wolfe. They think big and they can be daydreamers. And The Wall is in some ways a daydream. And I'm glad he's on it. He's one of my favourite novelists in England. During the early stages of my apprenticeship, I used to love reading his novels, especially this one, The Debt to Pleasure. I love Nabokov, and this is a very Nabokovian novel. Then came Mr. Phillips, another good novel, and I love Capital, which is what we call a Condition of England novel. That was a genre that was really popular in the 19th century with novels like Hard Times by Charles Dickens or Mary Barton by Elizabeth Gaskell. But thing about Capital was that this is about 21st century Britain, and I still remember some of the scenes, especially ones with a footballer from Africa trying to settle down in London, and that was on the shortlist. I remember in that year's Man Booker Prize. This year, I'm really excited by his inclusion on the long list. Once again, I'll be doing a separate video. So if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please consider subscribing, because I'll be looking at all these novels from the point of view of creativity. How about how these novels came into being? I'm looking at it from the inside out and the lessons that I'm learning as I'm reading them. The Man Who Saw Everything by Deborah Levy. The story is partly set in 1989 and 2016. I love the premise. Deborah Levy was born in Johannesburg in South Africa, but she's really a distinguished British playwright and novelist. Her novels Swimming, Home and Hot Milk were shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize. And this one, now I haven't read any of her novels, but I'm looking forward to this one because I just love the premise. So I will be doing a separate video on this. Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli is another experimental novel. It's about refugees, it's about children. I love the premise once again. And this is another novelist that I wouldn't have discovered if it hadn't been for this long list. So this is one of the great things about the Booker Prize. This author has never published in English before. She's written in Spanish, and we could have read it in this English translation, but this is the first time that she's written a novel straight into English. So All those things are big positives. I can't wait to read this novel. An Orchestra of Minorities by Chigozie Obioma is the second novel to be set in Nigeria. And this is written by another one who's a professor of creative writing. He works at Nebraska Lincoln University. And this is his first novel, The Fisherman, was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize in 2015. And I'm looking forward to reading this novel. It is exciting to see more novelists from Africa getting a lot of recognition in UK and the United States. Lanny by Max Porter is the next book on the long list. I nearly said the next novel. See, that's the issue that I have with Max Porter. Otherwise, I think his books are works of genius. For example, this one, his first book. Is it a novel? Is it a novella? Well, whatever it is it an extravagant prose poem? Is it a short story? Whatever it is, to me, this is one of the best books that I read this decade. And he's a really inspiring writer. And I'm glad to see Lanny on the long list. I'll be doing separate videos on this one and Lanny later on in this month. So do please subscribe to my channel. Lanny has been divisive. I love it. Next up is the latest novel by Salman Rushdie. This is another one of those novels that I haven't got. It won't be published until the 29th of August by Jonathan Cape, I think. And once again, I can't really say too much. The premise is interesting. It is typical Rushdie. I used to like him a lot, but now I'm not so sure, but I will still read it. 10 minutes 38 seconds in this strange world by Elif Shafak is a novel that I was planning to read anyway, and I'm really glad it's on the long list. Love the title, love the premise, and she's a Turkish writer with a lot of connections in the UK. She is a Scorpio. She's the third Scorpio on this year's long list. Thing about Scorpios is that they are obsessed with sex. Of all the 12 signs, Scorpios are the ones who are always thinking about sex. They're also very secretive and intense. Interestingly enough, this novel is about a prostitute. Elif Shafak has a PhD in political science, and she's already taught in a lot of great universities in the UK and the United States. And I'm really looking forward to reading this novel. I love Jeanette Winterson. I've been reading her books since I was a schoolboy, a teenager in secondary school. And one of the reasons I went on to study English literature at university was because of authors like Julian Barnes and Jeanette Winterson, who made writing, especially novels, really exciting. And in my first year at university, I used to carry 2 books in my rucksack just for symbolic reasons. One was this one, Flaubert's Parrot by Julian Barnes. The other one was this good book by Jeanette Winterson. And I kept them just to remind me. They were my North Stars, especially in the first year. I graduated with a first class degree in English literature, and so much of my inspiration came from novelists like these two. It was great to see in 2011 Julian Barnes win the Man Booker Prize, and Jeanette Winterson has never won it. She writes these slender novels. This is where she has something really common with Max Porter. Both of them are Virgos. Both of them share a birthday, 27th of August. Interestingly, Max Porter's first 2 books are really slender books, just like most of the novels that Jeanette Winterson has so far published. Virgos are perfectionists. They worry a lot. They analyze a lot. But although their paragraphs and their books might be short and concise, the books carry a weight of meaning and symbolism. That's one of the things I love about it. Frankie Stein is a really exciting reimagining of this novel, my favorite science fiction novel of all time, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Now, in this year's long list of the 13 novels, the one I love personally is this one, Frankie Stein by Jeanette Winterson. I hope it wins it. Now, I haven't read most of the others, so when I read it, I'm sure my opinion might change. But the truth is, I want this for Jeanette Winterson. That's not the way to award a prize, but she's one of the few novelists that I used to admire when I was a teenager who hasn't yet won the Booker Prize. All the others like Kazuo Ishiguro, Ian McEwan, Pat Barker, they've all won the Booker Prize. So Jeanette Winterson is last on the list, and Martin Amis as well, but he's upset to quite a few people. So I'm not sure whether his time will come, but I'm sure Jeanette Winterson I hope she can do it this year. The biggest contender, the biggest rival for Jeanette Winterson, I think, is going to be Margaret Atwood, but we don't know how good that novel is. So I'm really looking forward to this year's shortlist. So there we have this year's Booker Prize Longlist. It seems beautifully curated. There is no author who's a US citizen. The list is dominated by UK citizens. That's really interesting, but that's an issue. I think I don't want to get too distracted by that issue. The main thing is that we like to think that all these 13 novels are there on merit. But that's when this issue comes into play. There are many novels that I thought will end up on the long list aren't here. For example, Ian McEwan's Machines Like Me. I really enjoyed it. It hasn't made it. And then we have Alice Smith's Spring, again an inventive, brilliant novel, not here. I have a feeling that she might become the Glenn Close of Booker Prize. Glenn Close, I think she has been nominated for an Oscar over 8 times and she's never won it. I mean, her last movie, The Wife, which is a Netflix movie, brilliant. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's on Netflix in the UK. It might be on the USA and other parts of the world. The Wife is about the Nobel Prize in Literature. Amazing performance by Glenn Close. She didn't win the Oscar. And Alice Smith might turn out to be one of those novelists who's been nominated and shortlisted so many times for the Booker Prize, but somehow can't win it. So that is disappointing in some ways. But the other big disappointment is the absence of Colson Whitehead. Now, he's one of my idols. Underground Railroad won a lot of prizes, but in Britain, it reached just the long list. And I thought The Nickel Boys, which is a really powerful, emotional, and important novel, would get on the long list. I thought it might even win it, but it hasn't even got it this far. I want to ask you a quiz question. How many novelists can you name, without Googling, who have appeared on the front cover of Time magazine? Right? Time magazine, iconic, and it's very hard to get on there. Most of the people who end up on it are rock stars, pop stars, politicians. It's very rare for a novelist to get on there. Without Googling, I thought of 2, Jonathan Franzen and Michael Crichton. It turns out there are a few others. But Colson Whitehead is the latest novelist to be on the front cover of Time magazine. He's doing something that's amazing and inspiring. For someone like me, he means a lot, right? He inspires me. So I am finding it frustrating that somehow the Nickel Boys didn't make it to the long list. But then again, I can't think of many other novels right here that might be superior. But then again, I haven't read most of the novels, so when I'm doing those videos, that's when I might have to rant about the absence of Colson Whitehead. He should really be here. But other than that, I think it's too easy to think about the negatives, because the truth is, the novel is still alive. I'm one of those people now. This might sound a bit pretentious, but just like D.H. Lawrence, I really do think that the novel is the bright book of life. The novel is important for me, and all the 13 novels on this year's list, no matter what you say, you might hate some of them. The fact is, they're all trying to do something new and different. And more importantly, it makes the novel important and alive. And I think that makes the Booker Prize exciting. I'm pretty sure that over the next few weeks and months, we're going to get a lot of people who are going to hate some of the books. But this is one of the good things about the Booker Prize and many other prizes. Oscar Wilde famously said there is only one thing that's worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about. So I hope that a lot of us will be talking about this. With this video, do please join me in the comment section. The most important thing is that we go out, buy the book, talk to each other about it, because literary fiction matters. Just to give you an example of why it matters, last year I hadn't even heard of Anna Burns, and then October, when it won the Booker Prize, its sales figures increased by 880%. That's like 880%. And then so far it has sold nearly 600,000 copies in many different formats. And so many bookshops and supermarkets are still selling Milkman. the paperback. I think that's really inspiring. Literary fiction should matter because it's important for our literary culture. I know that's pretentious again, but we need these novels because these are the novels that might last for another 50 years. Milkman might be read in 20 years' time. There's a good chance that could happen. So, and some of these novels in this year's long list could also become classics. Right, so what we need to do is to talk about these novels, buy them. If you can't buy them, go to the library, get them, and let's have a discussion about it. So what do you think of this year's long list? Do you think too many experimental novels are there? Are you going to be reading most of these novels? Do you normally read all these novels? Has my video changed your view of the Booker Prize? I like to be optimistic about the world. I spent the first 13 years living in a war zone. I saw a lot of death and destruction, right? I appreciate just being alive. I love being in a country that gave the world so many great novelists and screenwriters, directors, and so on. I think it's amazing to live in a literary culture where a novel such as the one that Lucy Ellmann has published can be considered for a prize like this. Over 1,000 pages. This is what we should be celebrating. You may not like that novel. I might not like this novel, but we got novelists who are daring to try different things. So, and that's one of the great things. That's one of the other great things about the Booker Prize. So do let me know what you think. Now, if you think I provided value in terms of information, education, motivation, or inspiration, do please consider subscribing to my channel. If you're already a subscriber, thank you for subscribing. You really do have exquisite taste.